Good morning. Do folks want to take their seats? Wow, that worked really well. Got quiet quickly. So we'll give folks just a few minutes to filter in and grab their seats, and then I'll get us started today because we have a full day. All right, I'm going to get us kicked off, and folks, thank you so much. So good morning to all. My name is Deborah Kennedy Iraeta, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of FHI 360, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to Day 2 of the Alliance for Peacebuilding's 2017 Annual Conference, Peace Now More Than Ever. FHI's sponsorship of this year's conference reflects our organization's commitment to the Alliance for Peacebuilding and to its work to amplify the voices of peacebuilders, to further a systems approach to peacebuilding, and to innovate, impact, and influence. It's really encouraging to see an ever-widening circle of practitioners, funders, and stakeholders to gather, to share and learn more from each other's activities, and to look towards the future. Unfortunately, the world and landscape seems to get even more challenging despite the successes of many programs and many of you. At FHI 360, we are encouraged by the results of some of our peacebuilding and crisis response activities at the community level. Our civil society and peacebuilding department is implementing USAID-funded activities to strengthen local peacebuilding and countering violent extremism capacities in Mali, Tunisia, Morocco, Niger, and Jordan. And our new crisis response initiative has launched projects to protect and provide psychosocial support to victims and survivors of sexual and gender-based violence in northeast Nigeria. Through our participation in this conference, we hope to share successes and challenges we are experiencing in at least 3 areas. One is accompanying and strengthening local actors and ensuring they have a seat at the table. Second is engaging and empowering youth. And third is adaptive learning. And tomorrow afternoon specifically, there's a panel where you'll be able to hear a little bit more about our efforts at adaptive learning. I know I'm anxious to get started on this very full day of activities ahead, but before I do that, I wanted to specifically note and comment on the efforts of Melanie and the conference organizers. When I looked at the 30-page agenda for the conference, I was set back. I hearken back to years ago when I think about conferences where there were a good group of practitioners, but we were talking to ourselves. And I think this year is really a tremendous success in terms of Melanie and the organizers to reach outside, to get outside of the community that we know best, and to engage other local stakeholders. At FHI 360, we made an investment and have been working very hard to advance the understanding and our own practicing of integrated development, helping to bring different streams of work together. But it's a tremendous challenge. I find that one of the things I work on day in, day out is asking, did you talk to that person or that person? Last year at the conference, I asked people, I left a message which was to the participants to be bold. And I'm going to just double down on that today. Be a little bit bold today in reaching outside the circle of people you already know. I think your conference organizers have assembled a tremendous group of people who will bring new lenses, new insights, and new ideas to the practice of peace building. And I hope that you'll take advantage of this opportunity to engage them and to excite them about the work that you're doing, and that next year's conference will have to extend the room again or do something, but it's great. Anyway, thank you, Melanie, and the entire AFP team for organizing this enriching conference and providing the space for the broad community to exchange on the complex set of problems we face and the solutions we can all contribute to. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? Good morning. Thank you, Deborah. That was so lovely. And we are incredibly grateful to FHI 360, not only for this beautiful space, but the partnership with which you help us plan and to create this wonderful community. So thank you. Just so wonderful to be here. And for those of you who want to start tweeting immediately, just a reminder that our hashtag is PeaceCon 2017. So it's wonderful to see you here today. I always have the feeling that we're on our best behavior at USIP, and then we come here and can really get down to brass tacks. But I want to thank all of you who came yesterday and to welcome all of you who were not here yesterday but who are joining us today. And I've been a part of this conference for 6 years, and I've never felt the energy that I felt yesterday and into today. And we couldn't talk about this at USIP because of their mandate, but there's a feeling this year that we have peace building to do here at home. And that unless we as peace builders face the polarization, the violence that we have in our own country, it's almost hypocritical to be doing it abroad. And so yesterday I had asked for a show of hands from peace builders from out of the US. Can you please raise your hands again? Just thank all of you for being here. I especially want to thank Michael Sadipo. I don't know if he's in the room. This is his 7th year coming from Nigeria. So we are just thrilled to have you, Michael, if you are here with us today. But I give an invitation to all of you from outside the US to please come and give us your insights. You know about divided societies, police violence, racial and ethnic tension. So I really hope that you'll engage with all of us as we face this very, very difficult peace-building situation here at home. As we started the day yesterday for a quick rehash with an extraordinary revisioning of the United Nations, working to align all of its mission around conflict prevention. We heard about reconciliation and peace building in Mosul in language that was very different from the way we often hear about it in terms of stabilization or counterinsurgency. We spanned the peace building space from inside our brains to the largest power of social movements. And we heard about innovative financing for peace in Colombia, one of the great bright spots right now for peace building. And we ended the day with an inspiring celebration of the International Day of the Girl and the central role that empowering girls plays for peace. So as we move into our space today, somebody mentioned, Deborah mentioned, a 30-page program. We want to thank all of you that this was a group process. You might know we put out requests for proposals for panels and workshops, and we're absolutely overwhelmed in the best way this year. So everything you see in the program is a result of your work, and we're very grateful for your ideas and your framing. But I'd like to take a moment to thank first the AFP staff who made this possible. And I wonder if AFP staff could put up their hands, say Adam Wolf and Michelle Faust, who were our conference leads, Liz Hume, Jessica Baumgartner-Zuzek, Stone Conroy, Laura Strawmeyer, Emily Myers, Beatrice Poulini, Kayla Tyler, Nick Oatley, working with us as consultants. I also want to thank our senior fellows who have given so much in so many ways. First, George Halverson, are you here? Can you raise your hand? George, welcome. George has contributed copies of his amazing book, which are in the front hall, free for all of you to take. And thank you, George. It's just so wonderful to have your wisdom and your insights here with us. Chip House, who's our Senior Fellow for Innovation, and his wife Gretchen. None of you can know how much it means to us to have them in our office so regularly, contributing to so many areas of innovation in our work and contributing financially to make sure that we, as an alliance, keep going. So thank you, Chip and Gretchen, for everything. And our Senior Fellow, John Rudy, who's just joining us from Zanzibar, back and via Europe, so we're delighted you could be here, whatever time zone you're in. AFP board members, could you raise your hands? Good. To let you know that AFP's board is made up of 50% CEOs of our member organizations and 50% at-large members. They have a deep stake in AFP and dedicate tremendous creative energy, and especially to thank Bob Berg, our chair, for his tireless work and energy and just keeping us all active. Thank you, Bob. To thank our amazing sponsors who are listed here behind me. The conference is not a moneymaker for us, and if we didn't have our sponsors, we would go into debt every year in order to bring everyone together. So we're deeply grateful for our sponsors for making this possible today and to be here, so thank you. And finally, our wonderful donors to AFP, including the Carnegie Corporation, the Compton Foundation, Humanity United, the GHR Foundation. We're deeply grateful. All of your program staff are real thought partners with us, so thank you. And finally, Milt Lauenstein, are you in the room right now? To thank Milt. Milt has been a presence in our lives as peace builders ever for 20 years. I think we've known each other, as you have had a passion for helping us figure out what works and how to be effective. And I want to thank you for the energy and the passion you give us. So within the 30 pages of our program, we have a few key themes I wanted to highlight today. First is peace building here in the US. We have one formal panel dedicated to this, but in a lot of the other panels, we're talking about narrative, cumulative strategies, bridging polarized societies. This applies here, so I wanted to once again raise that to the top. We're going to talk a lot about narrative. How do we tell the stories of peace? How do we build a stronger presence for our field? As Julia Voigt, who will be leading our first panel narrative, says, how do we make our way to the grown-up table through our stories, through our narrative, to really, in the best sense of the word, change hearts and minds about peace building? The second theme is around collective action. How do we get serious about mobilizing for peace and breaking free from our organizational silos for truly impactful joint action? And you'll see later today that we've been working with Rob Sigliano and students and colleagues on a systems map of the peace-building field, trying to find the points of blockage and the points of leverage. And today we're going to show, to walk us through together how we might organize for peace based on this very fascinating map with its own story to tell. We're having a lot of focus on nonviolent social movements. We're finding great energy in linking the people power with the technical expertise that we bring as peace builders. And want to thank ICNC and USIP and the whole working group that we've had for the past year at the intersection of nonviolent social movements and peace building. We'll look at violent extremism and what are peace-building approaches to get at the roots of violent extremism and terrorism across a wide range of different settings. It's not just ISIS, it's also Charlottesville. And finally, learning and evaluation. How do we make sure that we're making the greatest impact that we can as peace builders? How do we use data and make the case for peace? So once again, I want to thank Deborah. I want to thank Ann Salinas for making this possible. It's just a pleasure to work with all of you. And we're looking forward to a wonderful day ahead. So we wanted to take a moment now before we move into our main panel. Somebody said yesterday at the end of the day, you know, Melanie, when I come to this conference, it's like coming to a family reunion. And I have that sense. We're more than colleagues, we're more than friends. We are family and cousins. And one of the saddest things that we do at family reunions is to remember the people who are gone. And this year we've lost two extraordinary women, Ginny Bouvier and Alyssa Wilson. And we want to take a few minutes to honor their memories because they bring, to my mind, the best of peace building, the best values, I miss them every day, and I think they would be so joyful to be here with all of you. So first, I'd like to call Chick Bock, former president of AFP, a peacebuilding leader, and a former Peace Corps volunteer in Colombia, to talk about Ginny Bouvier.
Thank you so much, Melanie. What an honor to be here to pay tribute to my friend Ginny Bouvier. We lost our friend Ginny in July. She was far, far too young, only 58 years old. She had salmonella and lupus, and they overcame her. Most of us came to know and admire Ginny as the head of the Colombia program at USIP, and having served in Colombia as a Peace Corps volunteer, it was very special for me to know Ginny and to know her work. I served in Colombia 50 years ago, which, as many of you would know, is when the FARC fighting began. I had nothing to do with them in doing the fighting, and I had nothing to do with bringing an end to it, but Ginny did. She played a central role in bringing an end to that violence. I used to catch her. She traveled there regularly, and I'd catch her when she came back to get an inside concept of what was being done and the progress that was being made to bring an end to the fighting. She was there training female mediators, religious organizations, Afro-Colombian ethnic groups, displaced homeowners, agricultural workers, landowners, business executives, government officials. She was involved in all of it, doing the peace-building work. As we know, the peacemaking, the negotiations were carried out, of course, by the government officials and the FARC leaders. But she was doing the peace-building part of it, building the framework and the climate and the conditions that would make the peace agreement possible and make it possible for it to hold. She was admired by everyone. In fact, while she was ill, Colombians organized prayer vigils in her behalf. Colombia's president, Juan Manuel Santos, won the Nobel Peace Prize for that agreement, but he knew the role that she played in helping make it happen. The Colombian newspaper El Espectador said her committed, discreet, and persistent work for peace has been and continues to be key to the success of the peace in Colombia. Nancy Lindborg, president of USIP, said Ginny committed her heart and soul to building a more peaceful world, and I think of no higher praise than to say she succeeded. Congressman Jim McGovern of Massachusetts gave a tribute to Ginny on the floor of the U.S. Congress the day before she died. Said she is a powerful voice for peace, a strong, loving, generous spirit. Joe Eldridge, the recently retired chaplain at American University, knew her well, said she was focused and determined, fervently committed to advancing peace and justice agenda for the hemisphere. She was relentless in her pursuit of a more gentle and kinder world. We lost our friend. My friend Peter Yarrow of Peter, Paul, and Mary wrote a wonderful song called Sweet Survivor. And my favorite line in that song is, "For everything that matters, carry on." For everything Ginny Bouvier stood for and was determined to achieve, we must carry on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chick. That was so beautiful. I now would like to call up Theo Thissither, the Legislative Secretary for Peacebuilding Policy at the Friends Committee on National Legislation, who's a dear friend of Alyssa Wilson, a fellow peacebuilder in the work on Burundi. We lost Alyssa this year and over Christmas at age 38 from breast cancer. I miss her every day. I think I'll hear her laugh around the corner. I wish I could gain her wise insight and counsel, her sense of humor during these turbulent and confusing times. She's truly one of the most extraordinary women I have ever met, and we've decided we'd like to dedicate this day of the conference to Alyssa.
So when Melanie asked me to come up here and say a few words about Alyssa, I had to sit on that for a few minutes, actually, for the rest of the day. So I have a few words to say about Alyssa, because I don't think I can say more than that without completely breaking down. Many, I think, in this room knew Alyssa, knew her well. Many of the board members of the Alliance for Peacebuilding knew Alyssa. But I just have a few words to describe Alyssa, because she was a dear friend, she was a collaborator, she was a colleague, she was a partner in many ways to our work. Bold and courageous and passionate, compassionate and kind, hopeful and persistent. Alyssa was never afraid to speak her mind in any given issue at any given time. We knew what she thought and what she stood for. Alyssa and I traveled to Burundi together. And when we came back, we would make the rounds on Capitol Hill. Usually, I set up the meetings on the Hill, and we would go into different congressional offices to talk about Burundi, talk about what the U.S. role could be in the political crisis in Burundi. And since I was the one who set up those meetings, Alyssa would often say to me, she's like, "You take the lead. I'm just a backup dancer." Well, Alyssa was never just a backup dancer. Many of you will know. Alyssa was passionate about preventing war in Burundi, and she was willing to work for it. She was passionate about peace, and she was passionate about diversity. I think Melanie and Liz and others will know that Alyssa worked really hard to make sure that those people, that a lot of us who work here in Washington, that we work on behalf of, that those civil society voices get represented in the halls of Congress and the halls of power here in Washington. Alyssa was compassionate. She always wanted to talk and listen to the other side. She was so good at creating safe spaces for those of us who disagreed to come together to air out our differences. I saw this when she several times hosted the Burundian ambassador here in Washington for quiet conversations. And she was compassionate in the little things. One thing that I'll always remember is that day when we walked out of a meeting at the end of the day. It was pouring rain. I had to run home. I had no umbrella. Alyssa forced me to take her umbrella, and she said, "That's okay. I can wait it out. You get home." Alyssa, we all knew her to be hopeful. When, for most of us, the outlook on the world was doom and gloom, she saw hope. And even when we saw pessimism together, she was willing to figure out a way to create hope. And she was persistent, and she was willing to work to make her hope reality. I miss her. I think our community misses her greatly. And because of her absence, I think we all need to continue to work that much more harder for peace. I think we have a short video of Alyssa singing. Hopefully this will show you all who she was. This is a video of Alyssa when she and I were in Burundi together. And we visited a school where the American Friends Service Committee was sponsoring youth groups that brought together youth from different political parties to engage with each other. And they welcomed us with singing, and they asked us to sing. I was a cameraman, so I didn't have to sing. So this is Alyssa.
Plenty good room in my Father's kingdom. Plenty my Father's kingdom. Plenty good room, plenty good room. Choose your seat and sit down. I would be a peace builder. I'll tell you the reason why. 'Cause if my Lord should call on me, I would be ready to fly. So there's plenty good room, plenty good room, plenty good room in my Father's kingdom. Plenty good room, plenty good room. Choose your seat and sit down. There is plenty good room, plenty good room, plenty good room in my Father's kingdom. Plenty good room, plenty good room. Choose your seat and sit down. Thank you.
Thank you, Theo. In a minute. So I feel, taking Alyssa's energy, I think she'd be very excited to see what we're doing next. It is a great, great pleasure to introduce Julia Voigt, the CEO of Partners Global. And I am so fortunate to see Julia in action every day since we share our beautiful, sunny offices together. She is an inspiring leader, a visionary, a great friend, someone who believes just at the bottom of her heart in collaborative action, and that peace cannot happen in a vacuum, but has to bring interesting new partners together in exciting ways. Over the past year, Julia and through Partners Global and AFP have been exploring the power of stories and narratives for peace, and are starting to connect that work in fascinating ways with many of you who are here in the room. And she is organizing this panel, a keynote panel, on narratives for peace, bringing in two extraordinary storytellers whom she will introduce. But I want to welcome Julia and to say thank you for bringing this amazing work together.
Well, I knew that was going to be hard to follow. And let me just reiterate what Melanie just said with regards to Ginny and Alyssa's spirits being with us. And Ginny was very much a personal mentor to me, who spent a lot of time working in Columbia. And Alyssa is a voice that was an early part of this discussion around narratives and storytelling. So I really do feel very strongly that they're in the room with us now, and I'm so pleased to be able to introduce the panel to you today. So just a bit before I introduce these very fun guests that we have with us, I do want to just say a little bit about this topic and why we brought this panel together. We have people in the room from all over the world, from all different conflict contexts, different levels of working at a very grassroots level to the halls of power in the UN and the EU and here in Washington. And throughout our conversations with the Alliance, we do have a sense that there's a shift in this concept of narrative, which we're going to try and wrap our minds around what I even mean by that word. But that somehow in the public zeitgeist, there's been a change in the last year with Brexit, with Trump, with us making all of these very public actions to bring our values to light and to find support for the values of peace and peace building. And so it feels, to a certain extent, like we're losing this war of ideas somehow. And so I really see this work around getting our hands around narrative as a field, as something that's going to help us to build partnerships and to amplify our voices. It's something I've been very committed to this last year. And as Melanie said, we wanted to bring in different voices and different talents to share with us. And so I'm so grateful and pleased that today we have with us two really creative leaders, I said, I'm going to bring in a little bit of New York energy into our Washington space because it's very different in New York. So I've got 2 colleagues who are here visiting from New York City. Aina Abiodun is the Director of Strategy and Innovation at Matter Unlimited. That's a strategy and creative agency in New York. She's also the co-founder of StoryCode, which is a global lab for cross-platform immersive storytellers. She was named the PBS Media Shift as one of top 5 women in transmedia. And she comes to this work from a truly global perspective, having been born and raised in Nigeria. And then Peter Coakley is also based in New York, and he's the co-founder of Upworthy, which I assume is in a lot of your Facebook feeds. It's a mission-driven media company dedicated to bringing mass attention to the things that really matter, but using irresistible social media. And before Upworthy, Peter produced viral media for the advocacy organization MoveOn.org. And he was also a managing editor of The Onion. So we know a lot of good storytelling is satire and humor. So we're very grateful that they were both willing to spend their time with us today. I wanted to bring up the next slide just to have a visual for kind of where we might be today. There's so many complex aspects to peace building. And I think we can hold that complexity in our work. And all of us have different pieces of how we come to this work, the way that we bring about change. But how do we talk about peace building and peace separate from any one of our strategic communications campaigns or messaging of our own organization? The concept of rebranding peace, or at least coming up with common values that we can communicate together, this like uniting frame that hopefully we're going to learn a little bit about this from other social movements and some big causes about how do we find our uniting frame, and then what does that look like in action so we really can be a stronger, louder voice for those values that we all hold dear. So we can go back to the original slide, and I'm going to start. We're going to have a conversation, and we've got a series of questions that we've been talking about. And as a starting point, I was thinking to myself, many of you in the room are going to have a question about what do we even mean by narrative? And so I wanted to ask Aina and Peter just how you would describe this term. Maybe we're not even using the right word, but it's kind of shorthand for something we'd like to kind of grasp our hands around. So how can we as a professional peace-building field hope to engage in this concept of narrative and think about how we collectively make shifts in public attitudes or beliefs and actions? So why don't I start with Aina and then go with Peter?
So as we were discussing earlier, I think one of the most interesting things about the word narrative is inside of that there is an assumption that there is maybe a single narrative, right? So part of thinking about narrative is thinking about it as a kind of a very broad, loose term rather than every brand or every organization has a single narrative. There can't really be a single narrative when you think about cultures and contexts, which I'm sure you deal with all the time. I think we like to think about stories as a little bit different from narrative. It's possible that a brand might come to us and say, we really want a single unified narrative for whatever we're doing. And that's fine if you're selling toilet paper or potato chips. There might be one narrative, but if you're really trying to talk to people about something quite complex, it becomes very difficult to align under the one narrative umbrella. So I like to think about, you mentioned frameworks. Narrative frameworks can be a thing, an umbrella under which ideas live, and stories can also live there. I think the stories are the thing that we trade in because the stories are the thing that people receive. I don't know that people get narratives in a conscious way. Yeah. And narratives also has a nefarious kind of, shadow, which is that I'm trying to sell you some secret narrative that you don't even know about. And that's something that we really want to kind of move away from and try to tell stories that feel real and human and really kind of again, I don't want to say authentic because that's also loaded, but like that feel something you can connect to.
Yeah, perfect.
And I agree with all that, and I think the way I think about it is just what are the stories that people can most easily tell about your issue at a basic level. And stories tend to have a couple of structures, they tend to have sort of repetitive features, but the story of they are evil and we are good and we're going to go fight them, or they are evil and we are good and they're coming towards us and we need to protect ourselves, or we are all have deeply human traits, and when we work together and understand them, things get better, or people together are more powerful. Like, there's a bunch of stories, and I think one of the things that we often do when working on projects is just go out and start talking to people and see which stories they're most likely to tell, what types of stories are closest to the surface, and then start from there and figure out which types of stories do we want to make people tell more easily, which ones do we want to kind of like raise up, and which ones do we want to try to neutralize or try to combat.
Mm-hmm. Great, and I think, you know, storytelling has been a real theme in a lot of our work, and I think we're all trying to kind of up our game a little bit in our storytelling to really also be able to have again, a bigger amplified voice. And I wanted to ask then how you felt about how I started with feeling that something has changed in the last 12 months with regards to this kind of dramatic landscape shift and the way that people are digesting those stories and internalizing them and acting on them. And so I'm kind of curious how you see kind of, I'll just maybe say, the media landscape or this narrative landscape, and how we think that that's really shifting.
So I can speak to it sort of the structure of the media landscape. I feel like there's two big answers to the question. One is about the media landscape, and the other is about sort of the news events and the people in power and how that has changed things. But the media landscape has changed not just in the last year, but sort of every 18 months for the past 10 years or something like that. I started Upworthy in 2012 as a company that had this crazy idea that social media might be kind of a big deal and that we should try to figure out how to tell stories there. And when we started in 2012, the idea that Facebook was a big place that was going to have an influence on things was actually like a mocked and crazy idea. It wasn't seen as obvious at all. There was a sense that Twitter was where things were going to happen, and that newspapers were still pretty dominant, and local news, and there were all these other things going on, and Facebook was kind of like a little plaything. And I think that we've seen the just rapid ascendance of Facebook to be a thing that 2 billion people use every month on 3.5 billion smartphones. And I think this is now well understood, but what that does to the types of stories that can thrive and can be seen is dramatic. I think that for lots of people who think about strategic communications, the question is, how do I make this interesting to a reporter who will then has access to an audience and can get the story out? That is one of the tools, but that basically barely matters at all now. Like, reporters play some role in some types of stories, but when you can go directly to billions of people, and when they're more likely to see the stories that most outrage them, or most inspire them, or most validate their pre-existing notions, it just changes the stories that get seen and changes the stories that are silenced. So I think that has been dramatic, and even within the rise of Facebook and rise of social platforms, just the switch to video, which was a complete reordering of what mattered about 2.5 years ago that continues to this day, the switch to live, the switch to VR, like all of these things are changing at such a rapid pace that we started as like a media upstart, and pretty soon we were having to fight the same internal change-making battles that legacy media organization, like that the New York Times is saying, we need to innovate faster. We were an 18-month-old startup saying, we're still thinking like the old ways, like we used to 8 months ago. Like, this is like a new world. So I think just the rate of change and the scale of change forces people to rethink everything.
I'm going to add on to that and say that I think the technology factor cannot be understated. I think one of the most interesting things about the way in which that landscape has developed is that it's created new monopolies, right? So in those monopolies, your ability, like Peter said, to get the message you want out, if it's not the most popular thing to say or the most, in some cases, divisive thing to say, because those things get views, then you're kind of in a tough spot, and you're always having to be more and more and more creative to get the message you need out. Hence why there's certainly a pressing need to find the most compelling stories that really tell, you know, your cause or your issue as well as humanly possible, because then you have maybe a shot of cutting through the noise. But something that's also really interesting, and I think in your space that we're seeing is, which everyone has, I'm sure, been following the whole Russia Facebook debacle, is this idea that media is being weaponized. And so weaponizing media means that we're fighting on our side. You know, there are real life wars, right, that are being fought in all sorts of conflict around the world. And now we're kind of dealing with technology as actually a tool of war in a way. And it's very weird because those of us who are not trained or understand how to deal with these things, and by the way, that includes the people who created the platforms, are absolutely underprepared to deal with how these platforms are being used. So it puts us as media makers in a very strange situation, but it also makes us sort of more accountable and forces us to be more ethical, because in actual fact, like, if you were someone who peddled in sort of half-truths and things that were just designed to rile people up, you have kind of pause for thought now that you've seen what the possibilities are when a technology is taken to the nth degree. It's also putting, I hope, some pressure on the creators of these platforms to think about the human side of what they're creating and not just technology for technology's sake, or just sort of letting the technology itself manifest destiny. And I think that's a huge cloud that is sort of hovering over us every time we create a piece of media. And it's also why we think about alternative platforms and try to think outside the social media silos that we have been. And I'm sure you guys are dealing with that as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
can I say one more thing just about, I mean, the other thing that's happened, and I think tying together Brexit and Trump and then also a bunch of good things, is, I mean, it really is remarkable how much the gatekeepers of media and storytelling were able to control the conversation. And it used to be that in politics, it would be the parties. In media, it was a few broadcast channels. And I think there are a lot of people who were outside of a pretty narrow understanding of what the mainstream were, who were very poorly served by that. And I think in some cases, those voices are being heard now, and we're understanding the experience of people who aren't white men better than we ever have before, and that is a wonderful thing and way overdue. And we're also understanding the rage and anger and ugliness of people who are white men in ways that we didn't used to also. And I feel like we're seeing like what happens when there's no rules and what happens when there's no gatekeepers is a lot of people whose voices were unheard for good and ill are now being heard very loudly. And like, as a fan of socialized medicine, I'm happy that now we can talk about Medicare for all, because you can see that that's actually what lots of people want. And as an opponent of Nazis, I'm like unhappy that their voices are being heard so much. So it very much cuts both ways. But I think that I hadn't realized how much sort of gatekeepers were keeping things at bay in the global conversation until you break them all down and see.
Yeah. So one thing that I'm struck by a little bit, just listening to two very sophisticated, embedded professionals in this world, is how much they're also acknowledging that they're struggling to keep up with the pace of change. And so a thought that I've had about the peace building field is how can we possibly expect our communications managers in our own NGOs or our field to also become sophisticated media professionals, to understand and engage and have an impact on what we need to impact. And so really I think our commitment has to be a partnership model. We need to be in constant conversation with people like these two on the stage and figure out how are we linking talents, because they're in it, they're studying it, they're adapting, and we have our issues, but how do we continue to find these partnership mechanisms? And I'm going to talk about that a little bit during the Ignite talks after the break. But I would like to ask you about how you've seen this kind of partnership model unfolding in your field. If you've seen kind of your colleagues or how you have been adapting in this context to try and kind of counter divisive narratives or to, even if you can't, if these alternative voices and the kind of partnerships you've seen unfold as a result.
So we've been talking in sort of like maybe big ideas, but let me just kind of bring it down to earth here. So one of the things at Matter where we do strategy for and creative for social impact organizations, brands, we worked with an organization called Enterprise, and they had this program called Make Room, which essentially was established to bring light to a hidden subject, which is it affects about 11 million Americans, and it's the families that are the working poor who are always living one paycheck away from homelessness. And the idea is that when we think about homelessness, we think about it really in terms of people who live on the street, not families that are just struggling to make ends meet. And if something happens, one disruption happens, they're completely, high and dry. And so they came to us to talk about how can we bring attention to this issue. It's huge. It's something that people really need to know about. And can you think outside the box? And so we came up with an idea of, what would a modern day rent party look like, right? And that was really the genesis of an idea to create a partnership that was a music partnership. We teamed up with a bunch of well-known musicians, and we took them to the homes of some of the people that were in this situation all over the country. It was the series. And these events were always on the first of the month when your rent is due. And we created the series that actually spun off an entire new nonprofit to support this particular issue. And I'm going to show you a video of one of our partner artists and a family that we did.
So we had a request to start off with Common Baby. Is that okay if we begin there? You guys feel like singing it with us. We always encourage that.
I didn't really think she was actually gonna come. I thought it was it wasn't legit. I just, hey, I just met you, yeah, and this is crazy. But here's my number, so call me maybe. It's hard to look right at your baby, but here's my number, so call me maybe.
My family and I are really excited to be hosting the inaugural Concerts for the First with Carly Rae Jepsen.
I really like you, and I want you to want me to. Oh, did I say too much? I'm so in my head when we're out of touch. But I really like you. I want you to want me to. Hey. What pretty smiles. Thank you guys so much for having us here today.
Can't believe that just happened.
I feel like tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I'm going to feel so much more positive because people are out there that care.
Join us, and let's bring opportunity home.
I really like you.
So sometimes narrative is not a traditional story. Sometimes it's happening in real time. And the idea is really, how can we bring attention to issues any way we possibly can? And we really draw on anything that's culturally relevant. When we brainstorm, we really think about who the people are. In this case, a lot of the people that we're dealing with, they are families, they have kids, they're connected to pop culture. This stuff really excites them. Nothing about anything that happened in their homes, and these are in their homes, all the concerts were in their homes, was really staged. It was just like, hey, could you come and play an acoustic set in this person's home on the 1st of the month? And anyone in the neighborhood can come by and see it, and we would film it. So this is the kind of thinking we do around how to break through issues that are really, really tough. And, you know, the idea of bringing in pop culture icons, we love that because it just immediately tells people that it does, like what the father said at the end, that it feels like people care. And it's not just for him to feel like people care, it's for other people to see that expression on screen. So that's an example.
Excellent, thank you. Peter, do you want to?
Well, I was just thinking, like, one of the things that's most valuable about partnerships is, like you said, people are really good at what they're really good at. And I think that when we were building Upworthy, we wanted it to be this huge megaphone for ideas that matter, which largely like progressive ideas about togetherness and about equality and about justice. But because we were sort of the popularizers, we were sort of the megaphone, the wide end of the funnel, it meant that like we didn't hire people that knew everything about every issue. And so one of the most valuable things about partnerships for us would be to talk to people who are really smart and really living each issue day in and day out and figure out if we could get 1 million people tomorrow to be thinking about this topic, what part of it should they be thinking about? What's most helpful? And what's counterproductive? Like, where are we possibly telling the wrong parts of the story? So being able to learn from people about what mattered, where there were inflection points in movements, and where there were sort of sub-narratives that needed to be raised up, allowed us to do our job. And without that, we then you're kind of like a media company chasing a daily goal of trying to get lots of people to look at your stuff, but you kind of lose touch with the purpose unless you're talking to actual subject matter experts.
Yeah, excellent. Well, we have a lot of subject matter experts here that would love to find that bigger megaphone, I think. And so this partnership idea is like, how do we think about ourselves and the assets that we have and all of the interesting stories to then also be able to be a part of that funnel that you're talking about? So one thing that I wanted to bring into the room, I was fortunate with several colleagues who are here in the beginning of the week to be interacting with another agency called Common, who shared with us some of the work that they'd been doing on the climate change movement. And we make a lot of kind of similarities between complex peace building and all of the kind of very heady messages that we have with the environmental movement. And so I'm going to speak on his behalf just to, with regards to some of the learning that I took from him sharing his strategy of working with Al Gore's team about reframing the narrative around climate change. Rob Schumann is based in Boulder, and he's the co-founder of Common, which they call themselves a creative accelerator. And he talked about the environmental movement really having a message about the sky is falling. And it was gloom and doom, and they referred to this as living in the green ghetto with regards to kind of stories. That was it was too intense of a message. And I know that resonates with us, because sometimes we want, war, destruction, nuclear annihilation. There's an aspect of our message that we can really go to, very negative. And yet all of us in this room are so full of hope, or else we wouldn't be doing this work. And so he talked about working with Al Gore's organization to shift the narrative from despair into hope, into action, that they were, this umbrella organization was very focused on policy. They had an office in Washington. It was, you know, kind of wonky with a lot of statistics. And there was a moment where they really shifted to a more general public-focused strategy. And I think that those of us in the field, we're talking more and more about this, is how can we also be more general public-facing? What does that even mean as a collective? Because we feel very comfortable in these policy forums, I think. And so the hook of this message for them really focused on climate denial. And they even renamed their umbrella organization as the Climate Reality Project. They wanted to start getting real, to really represent both real threats and opportunities in this message of hope. So I wanted to show you just an example of a campaign that came out of that to kind of get the reactions of our colleagues, because I found it easy to think about our global movement and how the climate change movement is really also struggling with these challenges.
Is the weather trying to tell us something? Across the globe, cataclysmic weather events are occurring with such regularity that it's being called a new normal. But there's nothing normal about it. Dirty energy has created a world of dirty weather.
We'll all have to start getting used to this kind of thing over the long haul.
Last fall, the world joined hands to participate in 24 Hours of Reality, a global event streamed from every time zone on the planet. It focused the world's attention on the full truth, scope, scale, and impact of the climate crisis. It's time to stand up for reality once more. On November 14th, we're keeping the pressure on with 24 Hours of Reality, the Dirty Weather Report. Together with celebrities, scientists, and international leaders, we'll travel around the globe to witness those who are taking action to solve climate disruption. So join us on November 14th to watch the live event, starting at 8 p.m. in New York City and moving across the world. Help make sure that 24 Hours of Reality marks the beginning of a new era of action, addressing the climate crisis.
All right, there's a little bit of gloom and doom in there. But what I found inspirational is they had a really audacious goal of the world coming together for 24 hours to feed into this kind of communications channel. And that really their target, they were saying like everyone could get involved, their target for this campaign was very much the media. And the Weather Channel is now a part of this movement, so that they were trying to kind of insert themselves into media distribution networks to partner for this 24-hour campaign. Both Ina and Peter have also really been engaged in a poverty reduction movement, which is also kind of a big, heady topic. So I asked them to kind of reflect on this kind of strategies with movements or big, broad, complex issues where there's a lot of different organizations kind of trying to interface together for collective action.
Yeah. So the U.S. Partnership for Mobility from Poverty was created. It was a collaboration between the Gates Foundation and to some extent the Ford Foundation. And they came together over, I believe, the last year to create a set of priorities to focus on, to work on this really thorny issue of poverty in the United States. And as a result of the work that they did together, they decided that one key element of their purpose as an organization would have to be about telling news stories about what it means to live in poverty. Because they realized that everywhere they turned, they were facing problems that were the result of what people thought that wasn't accurate about poverty, and the stigma and all the choices that were being made, even from the policy side to the way other people regard you in your community, were all being shaped by really weird ideas that people have gotten over the years about what poverty is. So they invited us, Matter, our agency, as well as these guys from, are you guys Upworthy and Good, or are you Upworthy and Good? That team, as well as some other people who work in the creative change-making space to come together, and we worked with activists to really identify some of the core issues and present how we would in this grand scale, really begin to shift the narrative about poverty in America. So these guys presented a super interesting idea. We presented one. There was a variety of ways that we approached, and I can talk a little bit about what we did, but if you want to...
Why don't you talk about yours?
Yeah, so our approach, which is kind of like goes to the core of how we work, is we started off really by asking the question, what are some of the most pervasive ideas that people hold about poverty? And some of them include shame that you are poor, and that then ripples into all these other things. Your unwillingness or the likelihood that you won't engage in certain things in society because you feel shame about your situation. And then the most sort of like insightful and where we went with the data that we found was really this idea that it is widely held, even by people who live in poverty, that poverty is someone's moral failing. It's their personal fault that they're in poverty. And so we went about trying to just focus on that. How could we change this idea? Now it's ingrained, it's deep, it's inside communities, it's inside your consciousness, it's in your schools, it's in everywhere. How do you even get that? And it's really like it's a tough one to crack. And so we decided just to start, like we always do, with just one layer, which is how can we get you to understand that you did not create that for yourself? You might have been born into it, you might have fallen into it, but you didn't create it. So our idea was really starting to reframe, and in this sense, rebrand, like, poverty as a thing that is a construction rather than a condition for which you are personally responsible. And so our entire creative idea, which we can't share yet because it's sort of like not really in the world yet, really took a radical approach to allowing people to step back and see how poverty is made and understand that they are not the actor, the main actor in creating that situation.
Awesome. And we took a sort of similar jumping off point of this learning and insight that actually more people who experience poverty think that it's a moral failing and think it's a lack of effort than rich people do thinking about poor people. Like, it's actually even worse within the community, and clearly false in all senses. And so we wanted to reframe poverty as not something about laziness, not something about character, not something about morality, but poverty as something that was blocking human potential from being realized. And we wanted another problem that we identified was poor people almost never see themselves or their experience accurately represented and reflected back to them. And there's a whole pipeline to get people who are well off sort of into the media through unpaid internships and other things. There's lots of ways for people doing just fine to then have a voice, whereas folks living in poverty have no pathway there. So we wanted to do two things at once, which was recast the issue as blocking human potential and say there's so many brilliant entrepreneurs, there's so many brilliant artists and creators, there's so many ideas that are being squashed by poverty. Poverty is doing this thing to good, interesting people that's holding them back and holding us all back from experiencing those things, and empowering people in poverty by creating media by and for people with that background or who had experienced poverty in a genuine way. So creating a whole new suite of media entities that were driven by people with genuine experience, so you can see both, prove the point both in abstract and in practice that these are amazing people who haven't been given the chance or have been blocked from realizing their potential, and kind of flip it all on its head.
That's great. So, when I was saying, like, people think that poverty or had some really weird ideas about poverty, I mean, what resonates to me is how challenging it is sometimes to talk about our work with people who aren't as ingrained in the peace building field as we are, and how there's some pretty weird ideas about what we do as a field. And so you can, I mean, weird you know, I think from our roots, you know, in the last 45 years and our roots in kind of anti-war protest, maybe, you know, there's some, maybe even some conceptions that we hold for ourselves with regards to how we fit in the ecosystem of, are we on the outside? Are we on the inside? You know, which voices are we bringing forward, like you were saying? And so you can see how the process of coming up with our narrative, the field, and then those people who are really affected by conflict, which I know many of us are extremely committed to making sure that those voices are also the ones that are being heard and valued. But, you know, sometimes I feel a little overwhelmed about how do we even think about it, about how to reframe these issues so that we can then get to the act or get to the media streams that we want to get to. So shifting just a little bit, I wanted, because I've been focusing so much on partnership, I would love to hear your advice for people in this room, for our field, about how do we engage with your profession and in order to establish these meaningful partnerships. And in a second part of that question might be to kind of, because I know you work with a lot of nonprofits, right? You work with social change agents, you know, people who are full of passion and a lot of heart and doing very good work. And so a second part of the question might be, how do we up our game a little bit in this kind of storytelling space?
So one thing that we see over and over again when we work with people that are doing great work in a nonprofit or in a foundation or in an NGO is that because you've been doing the work for so long, there can be kind of an assumption that everybody understands how important it is because you've committed so much of yourself to it, you know lots of people doing the work, and if you think about it, in almost every case, it is very, very important. But I think that like a lot of times people jump to step 2 in the communication where we want to say, okay, we're all thinking a ton about peace building all the time, right? And it's like, no. Mostly never. And so we have to start there. And then once we're thinking about it, then how do we want to think about it? What are the misunderstandings? And so I think, and it's sort of a difference between strategic comms and sort of large-scale storytelling, is that strategic comms can be often focused on an elite group of policymakers or others, and there you really want to say, like, actually, in this upcoming legislative negotiation, we want to go slightly this way rather than slightly that way, which can be incredibly consequential, as everyone knows, and a terrible story. Like, that's not a story, that is like a messaging campaign. And so I think one of the first things that we try to do when we're working with people is say, try to go up a level, try to go to the broadest and most sort of fundamental ideas here that still feel like they're carrying important payload, that still feel like they're actually substantial. Like, you can go too high and then every messaging campaign is just like, yay, togetherness, or something like that. And that's like aren't people nice deep down? Like, and it's not, that doesn't work. So you got to find like the push and pull between people that are very, very in the weeds and really understand the issue to people like me who know basically nothing and try to find what can we both talk about that's really interesting. So it's constantly pulling people up without letting let me pull them up too far.
Yeah, excellent.
So for us, I think we want to make sure that we understand the complexity of the work that you do, even though our job is to make it into something accessible. So there is actually a difference, right? So sometimes I think maybe nonprofits and other organizations that are not in our world have worked with agencies or communications groups where they just feel like they're just trying to spin their really, really complex idea into something that's meaningless and that is really reductive in terms of the complexity of the work that they do. So I'll say this, and this is not to overly hype the work that we do, but we make a point of engaging experts to help us fully grasp what our clients are doing. Because it's only as a result of that that we can come up with the best, simplest representation of the work that you do. So I think you have to find agency partners, creative people who are willing to spend the time to really understand what you do. There is no fast track to that. And so you have to trust that if they can take that complexity and turn it into something simple enough that it's as a result of them having thought long and hard about how this 1,000-page document is going to become one line. And that is actually so hard. And we have several processes in that, and that's, like we talked about with the poverty thing, where we go from finding a strategic insight that we feel is the most important in hierarchy to deal with. So in the case of poverty, it was really about this moral failing idea that it's really deep. We try to go as deeply as we can go to the simplest idea possible. Take that idea, work with a creative team, and turn that into something that people can actually relate to, because we're obviously not rolling out a campaign that says you are not a moral failure. So that's the sort of pipeline that it goes through. So I think finding the strategic creative balance is really big, and being willing to spend your time, like Peter said, like you may assume that everyone thinks that everything you are doing is either, super, super important to everyone in the world, or that they should understand what you're doing because isn't it obvious? I think that the idea of really spending the time to help coach the people that you're working with into understanding what you're doing, it's just huge. That investment up front yields lots and lots and lots of good results down the road. The other thing I'll say is that as an agency, Matter is also very focused on thinking about where the right place to put your work is and the right way to present it. So when we talk about like wonky conferences and policy stuff, I say that we err on the side of, even the most hardened, jaded, meanest policy person still has a heart somewhere in there. And we're gonna try to get you. And that's still, at the end of the day, we're human beings talking to other human beings. And so in the case of something that I'll show you in a second, we decided to do a virtual reality project because that was actually set up to be shown at policy conferences and industry events for this particular issue. And then we did have a public-facing version of it, which I'll show you because I couldn't bring enough virtual reality headsets for everyone in the room today. But one of the most interesting things about that approach is it allowed us to be innovative in the way that we surprised those very jaded people into feeling something for an issue that was really, really pressing. We worked with Merck, which is the pharmaceutical company Merck, on an initiative that they've been running as a separate, it's not related to any product that they create. It's a $500 million 5-year initiative to reduce or end maternal mortality globally. And so the project itself was really to people didn't understand that even in the most developed nations in the world, like the United States, that maternal mortality is a real issue. And getting that in their kind of vision required literally like us bringing that headset to them and having them experience it. So we're going to show the film, the 2D version of the film. It's a little different in virtual reality that we took to those wonky people and hopefully moved them.
Good job, good job.
Equal baby.
Exactly.
Seriously?
Seriously.
सही बात है।
Diablo, I'm fast. Diablo, I'm fast.
What vitamins?
You need to take your omega vitamins, you need to take your calcium, you need folic acid.
No swelling?
Okay, so
Yo, sekhula kangakana.
Kuranga nokwendele ekhaya.
Akiwa hapa bawona.
Oh, are you pregnant? Cool. Really cool. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I've got 4 kids.
Really?
Yeah, they're paying, but you'll do fine.
We can talk about breathing techniques.
इसीलिए कोई भी परिवार निरंतर साधन
Oh my word! Oh, Ella, look how big you are.
बेटा पूरा कान रख दो आराम से
When you pregnant, you have to make a plan, and you have to do what you have to do to protect and provide your young. And it kicks in, and it's a natural instinct, and you've got it. So I know that you're gonna be fine.
Caesar! Dad!
Driver! What driver?
You can do this. You got this.
It takes a lot to be a mother. For some, it takes their lives. But thousands of health facilities are saying push. All our health workers say push. All our worldwide partners say push. Let's push until all maternal mortality is a thing of the past.
Yowza. So, can you imagine watching that in a VR experience? And you know, Ina is a filmmaker as well, and so you can see where the power of people that tell stories and then, you know, put that into visual form to then bring kind of our policy discussions or our messages about the change that we want to bring to the world. You know, there's nothing that is more powerful than that. Really, I'm touched as a mother. So the final question that I'm going to pose for them, and then we've got about another half an hour to take it to the room, and I hope you're thinking of your questions now to really take advantage of our panelists. But I'd like to ask a little bit more specifically about what these campaigns and this process of rising to a level of a field-wide collective action campaign or narrative kind of umbrella looks like. Because, I mean, you were talking about the poverty movement, about each of you really developed very specific campaigns, and yet you were trying to kind of feed that into either a process or an umbrella of those kind of key values that fit it all. And so I really am thinking, you know, we have people in the room here who are working at such different levels. So, and we're trying to scale this all up to some kind of stronger voice that is united. And I wonder kind of advice or pitfalls or, you know, what we should be thinking about as we're trying to create this kind of new narrative platform for peace building.
I'm still struggling after the video.
Well, I can start if you
yeah,
want.
go for it.
So we were actually just talking before we came in here about this idea of kind of industry-wide aligning on some, not all, but some goals. And I think if we were to reach out to every organization in the United States that's dealing with the issue of poverty, they would each have something uniquely, that they're uniquely suited to do in that field, right? But they would probably all agree that everyone that they deal with on a daily basis shares some of the shame that we talk about, right? So if we were to, in that case, come up with a set of When we were talking, I said something similar to how the SDGs were developed, thinking about what are some core ideas that as an industry we might agree on as issues that would fundamentally need to be addressed by anyone dealing with this. It might not be their primary goal to address it, but it serves as a barrier that makes your job harder, that makes the world that you're trying to create further away. And so would it be possible to align on something like that? And I think, I'm not sure where that has happened with any real success outside of maybe UN SDGs, but, and that's sort of broad and very encompassing. But it would be kind of amazing to see that happen. It's certainly something that we're hoping to do with the US Mobility from Poverty Project, which is not just say, hey, narrative is something we need to do, but here are some key elements of narrative that we feel would really advance your cause on a kind of a large scale, and then begin, each organization can find a piece of that they want to leverage for what it is that they're doing. I think that's at least a starting point. I think despite all of the darkness that we feel around us, I think people are hungry for good news. Good news that we're doing things, good news that we're achieving things. And what that does, and what we've learned, and what certainly advertising teaches us, is that the only statistics that really matter are the ones where you win. Like, that's the only ones that gives people hope, right? Lots of more people saw this, lots more people have empathy for this issue. And one of the things about codifying ideas like that and goals is you can actually say, we reach these many more people than we would have otherwise because our voice is louder and bigger because we came together on an issue. So that's just something that we've been talking about. It's super hard to do, I'm sure, in any industry, but it's certainly something worth thinking about.
Yeah, it seems like a really important thing, in part because there's sort of a collective action problem where we've talked to lots of nonprofits who they say, should we really spend money on this like big marketing campaign when we're doing like boots on the ground work every day and here's our annual budget? And in many cases the answer is no. Like, we're expensive and we're gonna be expensive, and this stuff of let's figure out how the media landscape works today and really deeply, as Ina said, really deeply understand your issue space and all the complexity of it, and then go through the process of making that simple and universal. Those things take time and energy and resources. So in many cases, for tons of member organizations, it's just the wrong decision to spend on marketing. But also the feeling of doing on-the-ground work and having a sense, having sort of like air cover to your groundwork of saying, oh, people in general are starting to believe that healthcare is a right, or people in general are starting to shift on this issue, can dramatically change what feels possible and what feels doable. I think about it like we're sort of like tilling the earth so that other people can then plant. And so storytelling isn't very good at going the last mile of actually solving problems or actually like getting to communities or resolving conflicts. But if the ideas of like of universality and of humanity and of empathy are more ascendant, and the ideas of like America firstness and like scarcity are descendant, the work, I would assume, gets easier. So I feel like there really is a useful umbrella function that makes everything else kind of flow more smoothly.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And let me just say to this last point about, you know, is this the right thing for AFP to be focusing on, and our money, and, you know, all of the scarce resources and all of the complexity that we're all trying to grapple with, the urgency of what we do every day versus, you know, trying to kind of find, to find the wherewithal and the resources. And I do think that there is a general commitment. There's a commitment to the leadership in AFP. There's a commitment to some of our funders and our partners to find the way of engaging in this conversation as a field. And so I definitely don't want you all to leave saying like, ooh, this would be great to be able to do our own VR movie and, and to kind of figure out what those kind of 3 points are. I do think that we're there. I think we're ready to do it, and we've been talking to the right people who are going to help us get there. So,
can I use one more example?
Yeah.
I was just thinking back to the Freedom to Marry movement in the United States, and it felt like, just as an example of how if you get the umbrella story right, a lot of people can then contribute to it. Yes. Where it felt like for a long time, and this is a well-known story, but for a long time there was this argument that we ought to have marriage equality because there are 42 rights that people have under marriage and everyone deserves to have those particular rights, and it was like a kind of technocratic argument. And then it shifted to actually people should be able to marry who they love. And that was an idea that that was much more powerful and much more persuasive. And it was a large umbrella idea that then, every time that somebody came out to their family, or somebody's neighbor came out to their family, or it was a thing that was a broad message that was then reinforced by millions of smaller actions. And so if you can do that and have a large story that then many people can participate in and give resonance to, it's not, that can just have incredibly accelerating effects.
Excellent. Okay, if you guys don't mind, we started the panel just a little bit late, so we're going to go until about 11, well, in 30 minutes. It's 10:37 right now. So there are microphones, I believe, so raise your hand, and why don't we I'm going to take like 3 comments, questions, and then we'll turn it to the panel. Yeah, go ahead. Please introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Katie Mansfield. It's great to have fellow New Yorkers here. And I just want to acknowledge that all morning, from honoring Ginny to honoring Alyssa to hearing her sing to this recent video, we saw that most likely many of us are experiencing a lot in our bodies. And if it's possible to take 10 seconds to just let our hearts open up and shake our bodies around, because we're probably all feeling a lot. And when you talk about there's the message, and then how do we actually turn it into action, I just want to honor, we take it into action with our bodies. And when our bodies are really freaking out, it's harder for us to find those last steps. So thank you so much for your insights, for the power of the messages, and I hope we can all honor ourselves as we're honoring everyone around us.
Excellent. All right, everyone, like this. Deep breath. Yes. Good process people always read the energy in the room and will call out when that needs to take place, so thank you. Okay, I saw Andy's hand up first, and then we're going to go around. Go ahead, Andrew, and then Beatrice. And then I'll definitely get to your hands up there.
So my name's Andy Carl, independent peace builder practitioner. Thank you very much. Really inspiring, lots of fantastic ideas. This is a kind of technocratic kind of question, really. Our language that we use doesn't often light a lot of fires, and we keep on doing that. Like the UN has just come up with its own kind of rebranding, and we're going to have sustaining peace. And is that the best we can do? And even Julia, when you use the language about peace building, I can remember I'm long-toothed in this field, so the English language doesn't suit us very well. We talk about conflict resolution, we talk about conflict transformation. The word peace building, I can remember when it kind of got some purchase, but it was even then it was an enormous compromise that we would stick in English with that word. And you were using occasionally you used the word where the peace building movement, or we're the movement that builds peace. It's a different thing. When we're the movement that builds peace, it seems a bit lighter than when we're the peace building movement. And I'm thinking about things that stick. We had this International Day for Peace, And it goes by, and there's this hashtag that people use for this, right? But everyone's using different hashtags. International Day for Peace, Peace One Day, International Peace Day. and we have we're not a, we are a community, and we don't have a boss. So we all just. So I wonder why things. Is it about just this? What's the trick about getting things to stick? Is it just that, like when you talked about that, the right to marry who you love, or certain things just kind of, it just, as you said, it just works and is compelling. And we are still in search of the compelling a little bit.
Great. Thank you. Beatrice, do you want to go next? And I'd love to get everybody's questions, so let's try and keep them short so then we can also hear from these guys.
Yeah, I will try to be short. Beatrice Pulini, I'm the co-director of We're Wiring the Brain for Peace. And we definitely want to get stories out. You mentioned people want to, and we want to hear hope, but we also go to what reinforce our preconceptions and our visions. I think one of you said that. How do you go around that? How do you go around telling stories that is not going to reinforce preconceptions, is not going to reinforce the previews that people have? And I think that's one of the most difficulties we have, in particular with social media. Because people, and we see in our news feed what reinforce our view of the world. So how do we go beyond that?
Thank you. We'll do a third one. Oh wait, I did this half of the room. We'll go to the next half after.
Nejla Sherdi, Kroc School of Peace Studies, University of San Diego. I'll follow up on Beatrice's question. You mentioned this social media and the echo chambers, and we're all listening to different messages. How do you reach out across the aisle, and how do you create platforms where we're all hearing the same messages?
Okay, I'll just really quickly. Our language doesn't light a fire. How do we make sure we're telling stories that don't just reinforce ideas that everybody already has? And how do we break out of our bubbles?
So I can take a stab at an answer to all three, sort of, which is there's a lot of sort of alarmism and outrage about what the social media platforms are doing to our discourse, and I think a lot of that's pretty well placed. But it's also unbelievably, the platforms are also unbelievably powerful in terms of helping us learn how to be better storytellers. And so the short answer to all of the questions is we have more ability to try things and see what's working quickly and easily and efficiently than we ever have before. And so we're able to say, I think our team is really good at knowing of 100 ideas, which are the 10 that are most likely to really connect with people. But we're not very good at knowing which of those 10 is the one that's going to break out. And there we say, these are the ideas worth trying and worth testing, and let's see which ones seem like maybe they'll reach a little bit beyond the choir, which ones can find some sort of common ground, which ones sort of speak two languages at the same time in a way that will, that lots of people can see themselves in. And I think that's kind of the key to stories that work on social media, is being able to see something of yourself in the story, or being able to say something about yourself by sharing the story. So we had this story a video I forget whether we made it or we found it, but it was about this organization. It was also related to homelessness and about just the pain and anxiety around going from home to home to home in a very kind of shattered life. And it was about somebody that had built a new type of suitcase that allowed people to kind of feel like they contained, it brought their stuff with them with a level of dignity and class, and it worked across the aisle because it had two different frames in it. One was a bootstrappy entrepreneur who saw a problem and wanted to fix it, and the other was a sort of reduction in suffering and empathetic understanding of people struggling. So it spoke to conservatives and progressives both pretty well about an issue that didn't turn off either of them, And that was something that we kind of explained to ourselves after we saw it get 40 million views, but we didn't know before we posted it that it was gonna get that. Like, I think, so we experiment and we see what works and see which things kind of allow us to go beyond.
So to answer the question about the language, I'm gonna go back to the last little bit we talked about, just about coalescing under some sort of umbrella, and the freedom to marry example that Peter made. I think there are small things like that that are quite easily achievable, which is, we do know the power of a hashtag on social media, and if you can get together on that, that would be amazing. I don't think it's incredibly hard to do. I think we are programmed because everyone's sort of like mapping their own territory in the world, especially we see this with the nonprofits. There's this kind of like, it's really hard for everyone to agree on anything, right? But I think that the power of the groundswell movements like Freedom to Marry is about just picking one or two things that you can agree on and going with those things. And since we know that the sort of branding of anything is very, very highly tied to how it's spoken of in social, I would say, you know, the idea we talked about like picking a few things, one of them might just be as simple as find a social media worthy descriptor hashtag name that speaks to the movement at large, if something like that could exist. And even, it doesn't have to be divisive. It can just be a thing that is memorable. That's what brands are. Brands are things that are memorable. You just see the thing and you know what it is. When you see the red ribbon that was established for AIDS nonprofits, you just knew what it was, or breast cancer. Like, those gestures are gestures that are so powerful, and now you see them reproduced anywhere and you know exactly what they are. And I'm just going to say one other quick thing is that sometimes narrative is not even, and this is why I shy away from narrative in general, but sometimes it's not even a story. Sometimes it's a gesture. And if you could get together on a gesture, you don't even have to commit to a story. Like, just get a gesture. And that gesture becomes a way for people to start to identify the thing that you're saying.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so you want Susan, and then over here?
Hi, Susan Hackley, Program on Negotiation at Harvard Law School. This has been great and very thought-provoking. I'd like to see ways that we can connect with what's in the news on a daily basis, North Korea, different things that people have fears about, and they know there's a State Department that's being decimated, but what is our community doing that can make them feel a little safer? That we're at work in various parts of the world. Even if we don't connect directly with North Korea, just to piggyback on where people's minds are and show that we're part of the solution generally.
Great. Get some hands up over here by the wall. I'll take more than 3 this time. If we go fast, I'll get you to.
Hi, my name is Sarah Reckless. I'm with USAID. Forgive me, I have a bit of a cold. I wanted to ask a little bit in terms of, you talk about narratives and stories, and we definitely see that those are very powerful, but in the context that we're working in, conflict where there's violence, think Syria, I think northeastern Nigeria, or we're grappling with issues like violent extremism or an authoritarian regime that's killing its people, as well as violent extremism. And these are very complicated concepts. And, you know, in terms of the platforms that we've been talking about, they've really have become sensationalized. People put things on these platforms, and it's about, you know, evoking emotions, and it's about speaking to audiences that likely are going to already connect with whatever you're putting out there. I mean, how do we actually deliver messages that are more authentic and connected to real things like violence and loss, and actually talk about things that are much more complicated? Sometimes it's an environment where there isn't even access to analytical thinking in a media space. I mean, these are very complicated issues, and I think these platforms have simplified the conversation a little bit.
Hi, Derek Brown with the Peace Appeal. Building on comments that you've been making, but maybe pushing it a little further, let's take 2 examples. One, interreligious conflict in Burma right now. There's a narrative there. There's a need for a story and minds to change. And here in the States, we constantly talk about the foreign affairs budget. We're trying to get people to understand how little our work represents in the budget. when we're trying to change people's voting habits and getting them to call. How do you guys think about measuring the messages that you're crafting for your clients when you've got such diverse ranges of responses that you're seeking to engender? It'd be interesting to know what your thinking is on that. Thank you.
Great. So we'll take one more, Jamil, and then Bob. Jamil is right there.
Hi, my name is Jamil Simon, and I'm a documentary filmmaker working on a film on peace building in Burundi, and also creating a symposium in New York called War Stories, Peace Stories. So we're very focused on this idea. And the film on Burundi is a perfect case in point, because I was working on this, trying to raise money for it, I'm embarrassed to say, for almost 8 years. And I'd say I'm making a film about peace building in Burundi, and people would say, well, what's peace building? And where's Burundi? There was this amazing period in between the end of the Civil War and the recent crisis there, where they were doing some remarkable work in peace building, training thousands of leaders in Burundi, and it's a small country, a real critical mass to some extent, but nobody ever heard about it. And then the election crisis began, and all of a sudden Burundi made it to the front page of the New York Times a bunch of times. And how do we get people to see that there are very powerful stories going on? They're not, sometimes they take place in classrooms. I mean, they don't, no bombs going off. I mean, to some extent, the problem of telling stories about peace is that the drama is in what's not happening, if you look at it in a conventional sense. And so anyway, I just want to throw those ideas out and welcome people's ideas.
Thank you. So last comment by our esteemed board chair.
Hi, Bob Berg. We face a counter-narrative that we need. That is, the counter-narrative is security, military security, police security. But unlike, let's say, many other causes that you've worked with, we actually don't want to destroy security. We want to enhance it, and we want to embrace good security to reinforce good peace. So the question is, how do you then help assure that we aren't put in this false position, which would be a losing position of saying it's either us or the military?
Okay, so I'm going to do my best to kind of summarize a lot of great and somewhat diverse questions. So we had a question about connecting with the news on a daily basis, like what are people already thinking about? And similarly also then, there's a lot of people doing good work every day that people don't know about and we want to elevate. That we have some very kind of sensationalized messages around violence and loss that are provocative, and that we need to kind of be able to engage with that and have a counter to that. That there is a counter message about safety and security, and that's not necessarily something that we want to push so hard against, but we want to kind of work through. And then finally, what are the measures of thinking about how do we think about kind of how have we reached the diverse audiences with the various goals? So you don't have to answer every question. Maybe you want to split them up. What do you feel like answering?
I'll pick off. I'll pick off one or two. So yeah, it's hard to find a through line. On the sort of to the documentary point and the daily, how do we get into the daily conversation point? So I think that one thing that's great about social media is that the if it bleeds, it leads thing that defines news coverage doesn't define social media coverage. So Upworthy was able to grow incredibly quickly by focusing on good news and inspirational stories and people coming together, which like shocked all of our colleagues in the media because it goes against all of the ideas of what is going to make it to the news. But the reason that happens is because the dynamic shifted from what do I want to gawk at? What am I like so amazed at and titillated by that I can't take my eyes off of? That's how news was defined. And then what do I actually want to share and put my name on and associate with myself? That's a really strong filter. And so, hey, there's amazing stuff happening in Burundi, and it's actually making enormous change, is a very boring story for the New York Times to report, but is actually a really amazing video, as I'm sure you're getting, to share that people actually want to see. Most people don't like the sort of process of opening the news every morning and being incredibly depressed and wanting to crawl back into bed. Like that's like hardcore news consumption is a niche behavior. And because it's a terrible user experience mostly. And so, there is an opportunity for stories that are just good stories that are maybe pretty broad or maybe pretty positive or maybe pretty shocking or outrageous, but are just stories of good things happening in the world. So I do think there's a possibility there. And now you can answer the other 22.
So I think I want to talk about measuring and a little bit about like global and localized content. So when we work with the different clients that we work with, one of the key elements, which we sort of skipped over because it feels a little bit like sausage making when talking about things in such detail. But I will share something, which is one of the key things, and as I'm sure you guys do, especially if you're focused on platforms, is we do a lot of research on who we want to reach, right? And it can be very specific. And in the case of a VR film where we knew kind of the circuit of policymakers and global health leaders that we wanted to hit. And we followed up with them to survey to see how they felt and if they moved on an issue and so on. So there's like the last mile of this process, which isn't just the like everyone goes away and feels good. It's the like, did we have the impact, right? And that goes for when we use platforms as well, is we do set these goals that we feel are reasonable given what that organization is trying to achieve. So for example, in the case of an issue where you're trying to get localized support, we're really going to think about what the platforms are that are local to that issue and to that community. And sometimes it isn't even media. So there is an interesting case study of a group, I think it was I think McCann India did this for the health ministry of Afghanistan. They were trying to get immunization. I don't know if you know this, but Afghanistan has the worst immunization for children record out there. And so they were trying to bring up the numbers in immunization. And the goal was really, should we put out a campaign that says immunize your child? They've tried that, it didn't work. So they came up with a really clever idea. So children have these bracelets that are supposed to ward off evil spirits. They all wear them. They're just these little, these kind of like beads, natural beads that they wear on their wrists since they're babies. So what they did is they developed this very intricate system, and this is a very interesting solution to a very complex problem, which is sometimes you don't need media to sell an idea. Sometimes you need an idea to just be an idea and to be very effectively executed, right? And it works to communicate the message. So what they did was they came up with a system where of colored beads that could be woven into the bracelet that the child would wear. And when the child went to a doctor for immunization, they added the bead that was coded to mean a particular shot had been given, a vaccine had been given. And also, you may know that a lot of the population of Afghanistan and the area that they're dealing with, the rural areas, is also illiterate. So what the color coding did is it skipped past a lot of issues that you have when you're trying to communicate with people who are not on social media, who are not going to hear your message in the way that it did. And so every healthcare provider that touched that child knew kind of what the status of their vaccine records were. And that allowed them to it's just the most effective way they could say, hey, vaccinate your child. Has your child been vaccinated? Yes, they have. And created a kind of, sort of like celebratory thing about when your child gets all their beads, they get something fun. And it's just sort of like this less, sort of you worked with the culture, so that you had the context and the culture. You had a way to measure the success, which is how many of these kids actually got it. So did you move the needle? Not like, I put this message out in the world, I don't know if anyone heard it, I think vaccination rates went up 0.002, I don't know because we can't really count. So I think working backwards from a place of like where you want to be, localized or global, and finding an accountability model. Because remember, we're in media, but we're increasingly having to be far more accountable for what's happening as a result of what we put out there. So we can have all the, feels that we want, but at the end of the day, like, we still need to deliver you something that you need. So I would say in the case of where you have localized issues that you need to reach, you have to really think about modifying the way that you deliver a message on a platform, whatever that platform might be, and it might not actually be typical media.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And so, and also what I'm hearing from Ina with regards to, this idea of kind of security and safety is we also just have to figure out who are we talking to, because we know that we've got sometimes a military audience, sometimes we have policymakers, and sometimes we have others. So, okay, so I got the 5-minute kind of sign from our colleagues in the front. So if you are burning to say one last thing, we have 5 minutes. So really fast in the back of the room, because I told us we'd go there. Let's just pass around the microphone really quick, speed round.
Speed round.
My real quick question is about nuance. It builds on a question over here, not just in terms of strategy, but assessment. We're all about, many times, don't be overly simplistic in your assessment. How do you deal with that?
I think you guys are great, and I love what you're saying. You gave me an idea from what you said about perhaps working with the SDGs, and I think there may be a path forward to actually look at the narratives being measured as the SDG progress is being measured, and it really would appeal to all of us as peace builders, and I thank you for how you're thinking and approaching this.
Ron Craybill. I've found this very stimulating. My question is how to move it forward to enable people like us to get and use the approaches that you're using. I think it would be impossible to overstate the lack of understanding of use of social media among people like us. We need the basics. Could we set up a forum in which, on a monthly basis, an organization from a group of people like us presents for 1 hour in a web-based format, perhaps, presents a challenge or a goal that they want to address using web and digital tools, and get your feedback on it?
Excellent. So that's my little pitch also for joining in the Ignite talks, because we're going to get to some of these next stages. We had one hand in the very back of the room up here, and we're going to close with your comment or question. Oh, sorry, did somebody grab it? No, go ahead. Sorry.
No, did you want to?
Really quick. My name is Michelle. I'm the director of our refugee resettlement agency in Minnesota, and lately I've just been thinking a lot about storytelling and helping other people tell their stories. So I'm just curious if you have any strategies that we could use, like with the families we're working with who feel comfortable doing that and giving them a platform to share their experiences.
Great. And last comment.
Hi, my name is Elena Put, and I run an organization that works on technology for peace building. And I just wanted to throw out another, maybe a slightly different perspective. We've been talking a lot about storytelling about peace building, and we do a lot of storytelling as peace building, as a tool to build peace. And I don't want to take time saying what we do, but I'd love to hear whether you think that's a possibility from your perspective. So storytelling not about the work we do, but as the work we do, as a way of building peace.
And just building on that, I forgot, thank you, Yelena, that I was going to mention, a lot of us know also the very brilliant work of Sarah Cobb at George Mason University, who's really been looking at narrative as conflict resolution. And so that's an important part of our work. We know that stories help to bring people together. So we're going to have to end, so I'm not going to let, I mean, we basically had some good, like, you know, nuance, simplicity, you know, next steps, you know, moving forward. Do you want to say some last tiny little comments? And then I'm going to invite you to engage with us a little bit before you go on your break. Wrap-up comments.
This has been great, and thank you all for taking the time. On the, jumping off the last comment on just narratives as peace building, I feel like there's actually a big thing that we could learn from all of you, which is for a long time, media was a sort of shared conversation, and now it's basically an all-out tribal conflict. Seriously, where people don't believe anything that wasn't said by somebody on their team or in their tribe, and you've actually, many of you, been on the front lines of understanding how to talk to somebody who thinks somebody else is not a human and doesn't deserve dignity, and getting them to come to some understanding. We actually need to do that at scale every time we're trying to tell stories now, and actually there could be a very useful partnership in learning in both directions.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, you struck some chords there, and I'll go with that as well. Yes, you are already engaged in the business of narrative every day, in every piece of work you do, and that's why, like I said, I think as broadly about narrative as possible, not about any single narrative, but about every story that you touch in the work that you do. I think, I'll say this, I said it briefly before, but I'll just kind of put it back out there, and this is also related to the idea about the bracelet. Sometimes the story is not beginning, middle, and end. And those are ideas that we've over time created to help us kind of codify our skill as storytellers. Sometimes a story is just about a character, and it's just about a moment, and it's just about a gesture. And those things are very meaningful. What advertising does really well is it helps us find those things and helps us think about how to amplify them. Yes, there are deep wells of stories inside those gestures and movements and moments, but I think you are also the keepers of those codes. There are many of them. They are extremely valuable, especially in certain cultural contexts where that gesture is so meaningful that it is more than you think it is. And so surfacing those things as a way to spread the word about your cause within the community and beyond the communities that you work with can be extraordinarily powerful. So I think, as Peter said, you are holding the gold. You just have to mine it.
Mm-hmm. Nice final word. So now I've got a request for some action. I'd like all of you to get your phones out and go to this website. There's going to be a tiny little prompt for you to start thinking about and putting in what are those values, what are those ideals that you want to communicate. It will immediately populate with a word cloud for us to kind of do some crowdsourcing here about these underlying ideas and values that we hold that we want to bring up to our collective messaging. So we thought, just as a fun thing to do during this conference, this is going to be up during the break, but at the end of the day we'll have it up so anytime you can go in if you'd like to, so take a picture of this if you'd like, to fill out this survey. Well, you'll see, you'll be prompted. The question's in there. And then another plea, we do have a video camera set up upstairs in the second room where a lot of the breakout rooms are going to be. Daphne's going to raise her hand right now. See her in the back corner over here, our official videographer. She would love to capture some of your voices on film, talking about your values and what your narrative is for the work that you do. Very short, don't worry, put some lipstick on or brush your hair, but really short little snippets. It would be really lovely to have a collective voice from all of you in the room on video as well. So please, she's going to be upstairs in between the sessions. Just go get videoed, and if not, some of us are going to be dragging you up there.
Good. Please join me in thanking Julia, Peter, Aina. This has been amazing. Thank you all so much. I have the thankless job of a few it's a strategic communication, not the storytelling, that I'm going to get through in 30 seconds. I'm going to talk fast. First, hold your applause, but let me thank the incredible volunteers that you've seen helping register, who are around the room. These are peace builders who are giving not just the 3 days of the conference, but the prep. So we'll hold our applause till the end, but to say thank you to all of you. The people who are going to be here in this room for the Ignite talks and the survey, Peter, Woodrow, please be here by about 11:20 so we can line you up and get mic'd. We have real quick choreography, which is not my specialty. To remind you, during the break, we have amazing exhibit space, people who have set up booths to talk with you about their work. So please, throughout the day, go and visit all these amazing people bringing great information. We're having a happy hour tonight, co-sponsored with Peace Direct and USIP. We'll have flyers going out about that, 6 to 7:30, Mission Restaurant, DuPont Circle. Wi-Fi on an easel outside, you can get the info. If you are on a panel that's running concurrently this afternoon, please go to your room a little early, figure out where it is, make sure your PowerPoints are teed up so we're not taking time before the sessions to do that. Finally, over lunch, AFP business meeting. It's in our charter. It's a time for you to find out all the skeletons in our closet, and I'll say no more. Vista room at noon. Or sorry, whenever we start lunch, 1 o'clock. Okay, can everyone please be back here? We'll give you an extra 5 minutes, 11:35, but on the dot, because we have a lot happening at once. Thank you all again.